Okay, so moving on to number 4, where we're really getting up there now. This is a game that's kind of interesting because it's a game that I think is a little bit divisive, and it's an older game. And I think, I was thinking a lot about this list and the time period that these games came out. And I was thinking, hey, a lot of these games are from the late 90s, early 2000s when I was growing up. How much of this is nostalgia based and how much of this is these games really being good games and really resonating with me deeply on a gameplay level? And I think this game is that, because although this game came out in 2002 on the PlayStation 2, I never played it until maybe 4 or 5 years ago. So we're talking like 2018, maybe 2017. First time I ever played this game. And this game sunk its teeth into me and it didn't let go. This game is amazing. And this game is Final Fantasy 11 Online. So I never played the official servers. I actually played Final Fantasy 14 before I played this game, and it didn't stick. And Final Fantasy 11 stuck. And the reason that it stuck is because this game, like Minecraft and like Warcraft 3, it doesn't just suggest, like Final Fantasy 14 kind of suggests player cooperation and chatting with people. This game demands it, and I think, like so many of the best experiences that we can have in our lives, a lot of it is built upon really deep, meaningful connections that you can make with other people and making friendships and things like that. And this game demands such dedication between the people who are playing together. It's really a beautiful experience. I mean, people, even to this day, when we're playing on, like a private server or a classic server, I can't say so much for official because I know they've added a lot of, quality of life things to make it more kind of like 14, like you can play with AI characters and things like that. But I think the original classic version, which is what I played on a private server when I first played in like 2017 or 18 with some friends from Discord, it requires commitment, and you're gonna play with these people. And if somebody's gotta eat lunch soon, you're gonna give people a warning so that they can spend an hour recruiting a person to replace the person who's gonna go eat lunch or who has to go to work, so the party can keep going and keep grinding. It's just, there's that element, right? There's this community element. There's a lot of camaraderie. There's people really want to help you out. Higher level players will really give you tips if you're in a good community private server, and as far as I know, that's what it was like back in the heyday of this game from all the people who have talked about it. So there's all this community stuff, and then on top of that, there's the sheer depth of the world, and then there's also the fact that, again, this game, it doesn't hold your hand. There aren't a million tutorials. They literally your character freaking spawns and they're like, go, figure it out. There's this giant world. It's the biggest MMO ever. It's gonna take you forever to become really strong, and go figure it out. Go figure out what's going on. Why are you in this castle? What is this castle? Who are these people? Who are these races of people? What's their backstory? It's your job as a player to figure it out. And when it's your job to explore and to learn, I personally find it's so much more engaging and so much more intriguing than when it's spoon-fed to me for hours on end through cutscenes that I get fed up with, that I want to skip, that I mentally check out of, and I'm checking my phone. In this game, my curiosity is so sparked that all I want to do is explore and figure out what's going on in this beautiful world with beautiful graphics and beautiful character designs. This game, I'll say, the soundtrack, again, it's top 3 of all time. Just the best composers from the history of the Final Fantasy series, all composing together, hundreds and hundreds of gorgeous songs, so many songs in this game throughout all the expansions. It's just the perfect music to sit there and grind to. I know a lot of people like to just tune out the game music and put their own music on, but I love that in-game music, and I am big on the classic experience, and that's what I listen to when I play. But it's got all this going for it, and then it has, you know, the actual mechanics, which I think are fantastic, and I think a lot of what I like in Etrian Odyssey is in this game with the job system and the way that the designers explored the job system. Unlike a lot of other MMOs where you pick a class and you commit and you level up to it, you are just your character, you're yourself, and you can sign up for a job and level up that job. And if at any time you say, I want to try something else, you can try something else at really no penalty. Your other job is going to stay exactly where it was, and you can try out this other job and level that up. And then when you level that up, you can say, hey, you know what? I'm going to combine these two, and I'm going to try combining, you know, my sub job, you know, warrior with, you know, black mage, which might be a really bad combination, but the exploring, if you're not a min-maxer and you don't want to like look on forums and all that stuff, which is fine, actually, if you like doing that, that's fine. But if you are a person that likes exploring the game and the boundaries of the game and the rules of the game, it's amazing. There are so many weird and wacky combinations that you can make combining this class with that class and seeing how you do. The possibilities are like really, truly endless. And that's really what I love this game for. You can just sit down. It's one of those games that it's almost as fun to think about what you're going to do next in this game as to actually play the game itself. And I think those are the games that really captivate me. It's the game where you're at school and you can just think about what your next move is going to be. You can be at work and think about that. You can be on a plane trip or a long car ride and you're just thinking about how you're going to tweak your build in the best way and where you're going to spend your money, which is really hard to come by. And it makes everything super, super meaningful. Again, it's an amazing game, a tremendous game. I highly recommend everybody try it on private server or official server. If you want to go and support the developers, the game is still running. It's now reaching its 20th anniversary and they're doing some really cool 20th anniversary campaign stuff. So I'm going to try to hop on that as well and give it another spin. But it's just such a good game. I think it's the best traditional MMO that there has ever been. And I long for another developer to step up to the plate and make an MMO that does not suggest but demands player cooperation. Because I think cooperating with people and bonding with people is like a beautiful thing, and I think more games could do with that versus just giving you like AI players and you're playing online but not really, you're by yourself. So Final Fantasy XI, my number 4, amazing game, must play. It's a must-play game. Okay, guys, I know this has been a long video so far, but we're getting there. We're hitting number 3, and this number 3 game, I think these last 3 games are all going to be really obvious, and as I go through them, and we eliminate other games, it's probably going to become less and less of a mystery what the number 1 and number 2 are. But this game is a game that, again, like Final Fantasy XI, it's a game from late 90s, early 2000s. It's from 1999. And it's a game that originally came out on the Sega Dreamcast. But it's a game that I didn't play until very, very recently. I have always heard about this game. I had read about it and it was like so lauded and people said it was the biggest game of all time with the biggest budget of all time, and this is the game that ruined Sega, and it had all this myth around it, and I always wanted to play it. And in about, I'd say like 2012, 2013, I started really getting into collecting games for the Dreamcast. And one of the first games that I wanted to play on my new Dreamcast was Shenmue. And I kind of, picked it up on a whim. I'm like, this is a classic. It's one of the games I gotta try on the Dreamcast. And I fell in love with this game so deeply. I'm getting like a little bit emotional now, honestly, thinking about it, because during that time, I was really, really broke, and I was in like a really rocky place in my life, and I wanted to go to Japan so bad. It was kind of my new mission in life, was to learn Japanese and go to Japan, and I had just started taking Japanese classes, and I was getting really serious about it for the first time. And this game let me go to Japan. It is so immersive and so detailed and such an accurate depiction of Japan. I can say now, having gone there, it felt like whenever I had that craving and it was like, I want to go to Japan, and I'm watching these YouTube videos about Japan, but I just don't have the money to go, I don't have the means to go, I could play Shenmue, and it satisfied that feeling for me in my heart to a degree. And it also excited me. It got me more excited to study Japanese and learn about Japanese culture. And it got me excited for my upcoming trip that I was definitely going to take. Little did I know it would take me like another 7 or 8 years to finally go. But this game gave me hope, and it excited me for the future. And that's kind of where it hit me spiritually. And I think from a gameplay perspective, again, it's a game that doesn't really explain a lot to you. Are we seeing a thread here? I think so. It just kind of drops you in the world, and it lets you go, and it lets you figure it out. And there's this grand mystery about, not spoilers, but what happened to your dad, who killed your dad, and you're trying to solve this mystery. And it's part detective game, weirdly, part fighting game, something that a lot of people don't talk about. They're like, oh, Shenmue's so boring, it's a walking simulator. The fights in this game are like literally the Virtua Fighter 2, Virtua Fighter 3 fighting engine. Arguably one of the best fighting game engines of all time. So it has that too. It's like, so it's this kind of, you can call it a walking simulator style detective game. It has an RPG element where you grind experience points and level up your character and all of your different stats, and you level up your moves, and you collect new move scrolls, which are basically like what would be like spells or techniques or abilities in another RPG. So it has those two elements. And then the third element is the fights are literally like a 2D fighting game, and one of the best 2D fighting game engines of all time. I should say 3D fighting game, because it's, 2D mechanics core, but you can like pivot around people and stuff like that. Such an interesting combination of genres, and I think masterfully pulled off with one of the best soundtracks in gaming history, some of the best graphics, I will say, of all time, and people can argue with me about that, but my argument for that is the art direction and what they did with the graphics, I think, communicates artistically a more detailed world than many modern games. You might take a game like, something like Skyrim, or something even more modern like Elden Ring or Grand Theft Auto 5. And in those games, the world might be rendered in more detail. The graphics might be higher resolution, but there are not as many, somehow, still not as many individual assets as there were in Shenmue in 1999 on the Dreamcast, which is freaking mind-blowing. Like the fact that you can open a drawer in your room or in somebody else's room in Shenmue, and there will be different things in one drawer versus in another drawer, to the fact that every single apartment that you walk by, like even the fake doors that you can't go through, they have like a freaking nameplate on them with the kanji for the imaginary characters in this world that are supposed to live in this apartment building. Like it is mind-boggling the level of detail that the team put into this game, and like Yu Suzuki was an absolute mad genius making this game, and I'm sure he drove his whole team crazy probably, and the budget was through the roof, but I think it is just a ridiculous artistic achievement. I think you even think about something like The Last of Us, which I think you could say is like a really detailed world. But in The Last of Us, you're kind of like, well, yeah, but this room is kind of just like the same as that room. Like this is the same combination of tables and this and that. In Shenmue, the interior of one ramen shop is totally different than the interior of the sushi shop, than the interior of like whatever other store, the random little store that serves no purpose in the game other than world building, that is like thematically supposed to sell like pottery or something like that you're allowed to walk in and you're allowed to like browse all the pottery. They're all different graphics. Like, it's crazy. Yes, there are some assets that are reused. Like, you might see a plate here that's the same as a plate here, or an apple or something like that. But the sheer number of individual assets is crazy. And I'm actually gonna pause this video really quick to get the player's guide, because there's something really crazy about this game that I want to add to this. So 1 second. Okay, so I have the Prima's official strategy guide for Shenmue. And let me just look up something really quick. So in this player's guide, I don't know if you can see this. I can take some photos and kind of zoom in. Each of these little blurbs with piece of character art is a biography of every NPC in the game and their backstory. Every single NPC in this game. Everyone, I mean literally everyone, the random grandma that you see walking down the street that never says anything to you but like, oh, what lovely weather we're having today. They have a backstory, they have a height, they have a weight, they have a blood type, they have a schedule, they have a place that they live, or a place, like literally there's a building in the world of Shenmue that theoretically they live in and that they are supposed to go to every night when the in-game clock reaches nighttime. Or maybe there are some characters you'll find out that work a night shift and they come out at night and they wander the streets. There's crazy backstories. I believe there's one character in this game that you see walking up and down like all day with a briefcase, and he's really stressed out, and his backstory is he got fired from his job, but he's too ashamed to let his wife know that he lost his job. So he spends his day like getting ready and dressed for work and getting his briefcase and walking like up and down the streets of Dobuita Street, killing time so he can go back home and pretend that he went to work, and keep living that lie with his wife. It's just, what? Like, who wrote this? Who did this? Yu Suzuki, that's who. Guy's a freaking mad genius. And a lot of people don't, I think, appreciate or know about these little nuances of this game. I don't think any game has ever done anything like that. I don't think any game probably ever will, because it's kind of, in a way, pointless, but also beautifully pointless. Like, it's one of those things, it's like knowing, right? You're in a set, right? This video game set, and it kind of creates the illusion that like you're in a room, but you know that behind that room there's nothing. Like, if you hacked through the wall, there's like just like a black space. But Shenmue is a game where it legitimately seems like you hack through that wall, they're freaking crazy, and probably there is actually stuff behind that wall. Like, there's probably like a family having dinner behind that wall. Like, it's that level of kind of pointless detail, and I think it's gorgeous. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful things about art, to know that there are things there, like systems working that you might not know about or think about, but they are there, just operating kind of as intended. And if you really, really look for them, you can find them. And Shenmue, for the rest of my life, I will be able to play this game and discover new things, like again and again and again. Like, it would be impossible for me to discover every nook and cranny of this game. I think it would take like 10,000 hours for me to like really, really get through everything. And I think that that's beautiful. And that's why it's number 3 on my list of my favorite games of all time. Also, just like basic stuff, the gameplay is fun. The fights are fun. Leveling up is fun. Exploring is fun. Are the controls a little goofy sometimes? Yes, I think the Dreamcast controls I would argue are better than the PC port controls. I think the PC port controls are weirdly more goofy. So like, it's also a good game, but as an artistic achievement in sound and graphics and music, just mind-blowing stuff. So I'll stop gushing about Shenmue now and continue to my number 2, but Shenmue. Everybody's got to play it, and it wasn't just great at the time, it's still great now because I played it for the first time a couple years ago. Blew my mind. Hopefully it'll blow your mind too. Moving on to number 2, and again, like, these top 3 games I had to pick in order, but really thinking about it, it's pretty much like a stalemate. Like, they're all tied at number 1. It's really, the top 3 are all number 1 for me, but let's just go with the list, right? So this is number 2. So we can play with it and say it's better than Shenmue. And it's a game from 1996 that I played for the first time, probably a couple years after that. I'm honestly not sure when I played it for the first time, 1998. And it's a game for the Game Boy, and you probably already know what it is. And it's actually, let me throw you off, really? It was an indie game. It was like the first big breakthrough indie game. And that game is Pokemon Red and Blue. So a lot of people don't know this, but this game was made by like a handful of people, and they made it for like 6 years or 7 years or something like that. And it almost got scrapped. It got like extra funding and kind of wrapped up by Nintendo at the last minute. The story of the development of this game is like super, super interesting, but it is a beautiful game. It changed the face of gaming. It changed my life. And to this day, I think there are Pokemon games that are maybe better. Maybe they have better graphics or better sound or better gameplay mechanics or less bugs, more combat depth, more like, quality of life enhancements. But this game, for me, it strikes the perfect balance of nostalgia to gameplay. And I think actually something I don't hear a lot of people talk about, I think the ways in which this game has broken mechanics are all like super fun. I think the fact that this is the only Pokemon game where you can give some random Pokemon that in every other game is like super janky, horrible Pokemon, and you can give them like a TM, like Mega Punch or something, and just like stomp through the whole game with that. I think that's fun. I think it creates a lot of really interesting opportunities, at least in the PvE environment, to come up with a really interesting new creative team every time you play the game. I usually play through this game start to finish, probably about once a year. Sometimes I take a year off, but I played through it more than any other game ever from start to finish. And I can always come up with a new unique party. There are 151 monsters, even less of them when you count like the evolution trees and which ones are like fully evolved. It's probably only like 60 or something like that, 65. And every time I can come up with a new team and a new strategy, and I can go into the game thinking, how am I gonna cheese the game this time? How am I gonna break the game this time? How am I gonna get to go through that old nostalgic experience and put my own new twist on it? Oh, what if I save this TM and I give it to this guy, or I save this TM and I use it way later in the game on this one and it'll be like really awesome. It's so fun. And there's, again, it's that thread that's in Etrian Odyssey, and it's in Final Fantasy 11, and it's in Pokemon. It's a game that gives the player agency to explore and be creative and make impactful decisions that will genuinely affect how you play the game. And you could say kind of that sounds like something that's in all games, but it's really not. There are a lot of games, for example, like Zelda, right? Where every time you play Ocarina of Time, more or less, you're gonna use the same battle strategy on the bosses. You're gonna use the same items. Maybe one time you can try to say, oh, I'm gonna defeat this boss using only arrows or something. You can play with it a little bit, but not to the degree that these other games like, Pokemon give you. You can really do it your own way. And there was a great mystery to this game, like not having a player's guide and finding like where monsters are and hearing rumors about where monsters might be. I think it was like a beautiful, again, collaborative community experience where you'd all be working toward like, how do I find the rare guys? Where are they? And this person would tell you and that person would tell you, and you would have to go figure it out and fight through which rumors were real and which were not. So there's all of that stuff going for it. And then the actual like core mechanics are just fun. Like the idea of, okay, you've only got 4, here's an RPG where you only get 4 spells. I think it's understated how game-changing that was. Can you imagine playing something like Final Fantasy V or, Final Fantasy IV or 6, where you only have 4 spells or 4 abilities in the whole game, whether that's like attacking with your sword or spells, and each character can only have 4. It's really, really interesting. It takes the turn-based RPG, and rather than having it be this additive experience where you just kind of add abilities and you power creep up and up, it's a shift. It makes it more of like a chess-like experience, or almost like something more like a trading card game or something like that, where you've got a finite number of tools and you have to construct a strategy with this finite number of tools, which would be, you've got 6 Pokemon with 4 moves each, and that's it. And you need to build a strategy using that set of parameters. And I think it's like, people don't really talk about how much that changed the game. People talk about the collecting, how fun it was to collect and to trade and how that changed everything. But the party building and the kind of reductive nature of the moves, which really are spells in an RPG, it was like genius. And then the fact that you find what would essentially in another game be like spell scrolls, which are TMs in this game, and that those are like one-off, I think is brilliant. And I actually think I understand why modern Pokemon games made TMs reusable, and that was mostly because the online environment and the competitive environment, basically, it was the only way to fight back against people who would, hack or cheat and make it so people who play the game legitimately have a chance to build a competitive team, because they don't have to replay the entire game to grind out to find that one TM that's late in the game, to give that to their Pokemon and then trade it to another system and reset the game so they can do it. Like, it lets you, okay, you find a TM, you can use it infinite times. It's really to fight cheating. But if this was a single player experience, having to use it once, that one shot of just having the one shot to learn this move, this is it. I'm using it on this guy and I don't have another shot for the rest of this game, is really beautiful. And in that way, it's kind of more akin to, I think, something like a roguelike. And I've often thought about like, imagine Pokemon if you had the TMs and their locations were all like randomized every game. How interesting that would be. Because I find Pokemon in some ways does have like roguelike elements to it. Just in terms of your random encounters can be so different from one, playthrough to the next. Kind of rambling, but I think there are a lot of things about this game that are better and more interesting than later games for single player. That said, also, arguably, probably a lot of people would argue with me in this camp, the best soundtrack in the entire series. Like, a phenomenal soundtrack, really great graphics, even though some of the graphics are janky, and I'd say overall, like, Gold, Silver, Crystal really perfected the graphics on the Game Boy. Some of the sprites just look wonky in Red and Blue. I'm nostalgic for them, but overall, like, really great graphics for a Game Boy game. If you go back and look at original Game Boy RPGs, like even kind of ones people still kind of hold in high regard, like the Final Fantasy Legend series, Pokemon like really freaking stands up. Like, the towns are super detailed with flowers that are animated and moving. I think it holds up really well, even next to like probably the best graphics on the system, which would be Zelda Link's Awakening. Like, I've even heard people on YouTube and in reviews say like, oh, Pokemon Red and Blue, like the graphics were not much to, not much to talk about. They're like mediocre RPG graphics, but like, have you seen other RPGs on the Game Boy? Like, Game Boy RPGs looked really bad. There were like 4 colors that you could use, and they created these beautiful big sprites, and these like lush cities that were super detailed and had a lot of characters. Even things like just going in a shop and you see the bookshelves there, and like, not bookshelves, but I guess it would be like merchandise in the shop, and each of these shelves has different types of things. Like, there's the sprite art of the, like, what would ostensibly be like the refrigerator, and then there's the sprite art of what would be just like a rack of like cans of Pokemon food, and rather than just like one wall of the same thing, like, there's all these little details, things that you wouldn't see on Game Boy games. You would only see that on like Super Nintendo RPGs. Really good and underrated graphics for the time. I'm telling you guys, look at screenshots of other Game Boy RPGs and you'll be like, oh right, yeah, Pokemon is pretty much the, like, in the top 3 graphics department of Game Boy RPGs. So many things amazing about the gameplay and the graphics and the music. And then obviously, it goes without saying, the community aspect. Trading with your friends, battling with your friends, seeing who's the best, catching them all. Amazing. So much fun. Yeah, I think that's kind of been said to death by a million other people, but I also love that element of this game. All in all, so much replayability, so fun, just great everything. My number 2 game of all time. Okay, so we did it, you guys. We got to the number 1 game, which I'm sure everybody at this point knows what it is. If you can look at the background of this video, you can probably guess. If you've seen my game room tour, you can probably guess. Number 1 game is a game that came out on the Dreamcast in the year 2000. But again, I played it a little bit later, not so much later. Played it 2 years or 3 years later on the GameCube, and it changed my life. It legitimately changed my life. There was me before this game, and there was me after this game, and that game is Phantasy Star Online, Episode 1 and 2. Specifically, the GameCube version, I think, is the best version. There was another version, Blue Burst, which had a few more levels, a few more items. Arguably, some people say it's better. I think the GameCube version is the best version. It has the best graphics, which I can get into in a little bit. But this game is the amount of fun that you can have. Like, this game truly, what you put in, you get out. If you go in having wanting to have a serious min-maxy kind of RPG experience where you create the perfect build and you grind it out and you grind out the loot and you trade with people and get the best items and you customize your mag in the best way, you can have that. If you want to have a really fun, casual experience where you just whack things with a stick and, you know, you beat some enemies and you just hang out with your friends and you're mostly chatting and you know, hit the sword a couple times, you can do that. If you want to have a community-based experience where you meet friends and you form bonds and you email people and you chat with people, you can do that. You can just spend a lot of time hanging out in the lobby, playing soccer in the lobby, or creating new symbol chats and kind of being artistic in that way. Like, oh, how can I create, you know, new different symbol chats? I've definitely had sessions with this game where I sat down, you know, with like a nice cold drink and maybe some snacks, and I am not even kidding, would sit there for 5-6 hours just chatting with people in the lobby, making new symbol chats, meeting new people, being like, oh, hey, haven't seen you here, and, you know, they chat with me, and I'm sitting in the lobby in my photon chair, and I'm making new symbol chats, and I'm testing them out, and I'm like, hey, what do you guys think of this one? And, oh, that's really cool. Oh, I would tweak this. Such a crazy, diverse experience. And I think, again, that's something that is interesting about this game. I think the legacy of this game, a lot of it lies in, you know, or the the critical legacy of this game is people saying it's a very repetitive game. There's only a few levels. You just kind of grind out and do the same thing over and over again. But I think they're really missing the point of, this game it's one, it's what you make of it, and two, it's a community-driven experience. It's about fun with friends. And when you're having fun with friends, you can play kickball, which is super repetitive, but it's different every time, because there's the one time your friend's running and they fall and it blows the whole thing. And in Phantasy Star, it's like you guys die at the final boss, right? And you're hunting that rare drop and you die at the final boss, or you're just about to level up and you get knocked out and you lose all your money. And you could say that about any game, right? Like, you can play, a lot of people have fun playing kind of shovelware games with their friends. But I think Phantasy Star Online creates an environment where those, person-to-person connections can really thrive. And I think there are so many things about this game that people forget about. Like, you could play in an international environment in 2002, 2003, with a built-in Google Translate feature, you can just call it, like a language translation feature, where you could use pre-built sentences or sentence structures in a really interesting modular way to communicate basically anything. You could say, hey, I'm really into skateboarding. Like, that was built into the game, and it would be translated into any of the languages that were in the game. It would be translated into English, French, German, Spanish, Japanese. Mind-blowing stuff. Like, you could play and say, hey, I'm looking for the rare item. This is the rare item. You could say, I need this specific healing item or status item, or I want to meet you in this specific place. And all of those, it was kind of modular. It was like, meet me, and then you would go to a list and it would be like another places, or it'd be like, I like this, or I'm looking for this, and these like lists would pop up, and you would then form a sentence from all these different components. And that was translated. And yes, it's a little goofy, and yes, it's a little clunky, but I'll tell you what, there's no game that does that now. Like, there's just not. There's no game that does it. And this game did it in 2002, 2003. And Final Fantasy XI didn't do it. EverQuest didn't do it. RuneScape sure as hell didn't do it. And people kind of forgot about it. But mind-blowing the way that created this global community of players that could all interact with each other. And I think that's still true today on the private servers, because when you go online and play online today, on the private servers, it's a global audience, right? It's like the diehards or the people who are curious about what this game was like. Hey, it's a free game, I can try it out, it's free now, right? And they speak all different languages, and you can still communicate with them, and that is so cool. Like, I wish more games did that. We have way better AI translation and stuff now than we did back in the day. Why aren't we implementing that? I'm sure there's some game out there, somebody's gonna leave a comment like some game does that, but this was so ahead of its time. I mean, we're talking 20 plus years ago. So there's that, there's all the community stuff, and then there's the graphics. Amazing graphics, the best art direction in the entire series. It was not only a sci-fi MMORPG, which at the time was pretty unique, right? Everything else at that time was high fantasy. So this was sci-fi, but not only was it sci-fi, I would argue that especially episode 1, very heavy cyberpunk vibe. The original spaceship in episode 1 is incredibly Blade Runner-esque, with the flying cars going around and this dark, gritty, neon light kind of atmosphere. There's a lot of stuff that feels a little bit run down or broken. It's not that glamorous, futuristic city that you would see in a lot of things at that time, like Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, where they started doing this sci-fi. All of a sudden it's going to be these pristine, beautiful environments where everything is perfect and symmetrical. it had like a really interesting, like asymmetrical city. And no other game in the series has done that. Like Phantasy Star Universe, like the core city is symmetrical. Same thing with Phantasy Star Online 2, and it just feels very templated. And in this game, it feels very custom and thought out, and it feels like a real city or a real place. Like most places in a city are not like a symmetrical cube where here's one shop and here's another shop directly across from it and everything is gridded in a square. Like it felt thought out and real, and I love that about it. So there's that. The graphics were like freaking incredible on the Dreamcast. Like I think next to Shenmue, really one of the best looking games. Like the textures, the grass textures and things in this game were so freaking good. Just really, really incredible. And it looked great on the GameCube as well. The GameCube had a lot of enhanced, this is going back to what I was saying in the beginning, enhanced water effects using the GameCube shaders, which is something that I kind of want to do a deep dive on Phantasy Star Online and talk about this because I've never really heard anybody else on YouTube talk about it. But GameCube had built-in graphics shaders, and there were games like Wave Race and Mario Sunshine, and even I think Pikmin to an extent. You can think about that GameCube, there's that specific kind of liquidy, gooey water effect in those games. And that was like a built-in graphics shader in, I guess, one of probably the GameCube like dev kit libraries or something like that. And so they upgraded a lot of the water in this game to use that shader. And long story short, when they ported the game to the original Xbox and to the PC for the Blueburst version, because that shader was part of essentially like the GameCube graphics library, they couldn't port that element. So where you have these like beautiful, lush water graphics on the GameCube, in the port, it's literally just like a shitty texture of water that slides back and forth. So that's one of the reasons why I say like the most beautiful version is the GameCube version. I think if you had to play it in high res, the GameCube version emulated in Dolphin on a PC in like 4K or something like that is the best way because it preserves those gorgeous water shaders and also reflection effects and warping effects and some other effects that were kind of native to the GameCube. They all get preserved when you use Dolphin, obviously, because it's a GameCube emulator. So there's that. There's the music in this game, which it's hard to say is number one, but I think in my heart of hearts, it's my number one video game soundtrack of all time. If I only had the Phantasy Star Online soundtrack to listen to for the rest of my life, I don't think I would ever get sick of it. The best ambient music, the best battle music and boss music. It's so good. There's also like a ton of tracks, really. There's quite a few tracks, especially in episode 1 and 2. So there's a lot to listen to. And then let's dial it back and talk about the actual gameplay. I think the gameplay is beautiful. It's, I think, the perfect example of something that is just the perfect, I don't know, it's just beautifully simple. It's easy to pick up. It's hard to master. There's a very, very, like, believe it or not, there's a very, very high skill cap to this game. Like, people who are really good at this game are really freaking good. If you go and play some of the more difficult aspects of this game, like the challenge mode, which if you don't know is a mode where you get reset to level 1 and you have no items and you have to complete a series of challenges or levels or bosses with nothing, and you can't grind, you just have to be like that good at the game. That is freaking hard, and people are crazy good. The people who speedrun challenge mode are like mind-blowing, like the tricks that they employ to complete that. So like very, very high skill cap. And it's so simple. It's 3 basic attacks, and then you've got a palette of spells for the characters that can cast spells. And it's a slow-paced game too, right? So it's this very methodical, weighty kind of combat that I think, in a way, really has been revived with games like I'd say the original Dark Souls, I think less so as you've gone further in the Souls series where things have become, I think, a little bit faster paced. But Phantasy Star Online was like very much hit and dodge the character animation, and then see if you can get 2 hits in and dodge the character animation, see if you can paralyze them or inflict status and then do something else. And it was very like, you know, I'll watch your move and then you watch my move, and you're going back and forth and doing this dance with the enemy, which I think was fantastic. And I think it was simple in a way that I find a lot of modern games, like the combat in something like Elden Ring, I feel like where you're using so many different buttons to do what you have to do. I don't think a lot of modern action games make the combat better by adding complexity. They just make it more complex. And I think Phantasy Star Online kind of acknowledged that. I think even at the time, there were a lot of action games like Devil May Cry, way more complex combat. But I don't think Phantasy Star Online would be any better with complex combat. And I think that kind of, like, the proof is kind of in the pudding, where I think most people probably say this is the best game in the entire series. It's better than Universe, which had more complex combat, or Phantasy Star Online 2, which had way more complex combat. I think this is just like boiled down. It's super simple and it's freaking great. Yeah, that's how I feel about the combat. I think that's probably something that's going to be a little bit divisive as well, but I truly, truly feel that way. And like, again, for the 10th time in this video, that similar thread of it's not so much the actions that you do in this game, but it's a lot of it is the build up to it. It's how you're going to do your stat build, how you're going to do your mag build. What kind of character are you going to play? Are you going to be like a hunter that uses mech guns, or are you going to be a hunter that uses swords? And then you're going through the whole game thinking that, and everything you do, every action you make is in service of that decision and plan that you have. There's so much fun to be had there, grinding out your mag, collecting different mags, trying to get the right colors, trying to get rare armors and see how cool it looks on your character. All while, again, like making sure it's in service of the kind of build you want to make. Really, really fun. And then also what's cool about this game that I think is very unique is, so in Final Fantasy XI Online, what they do is they use the job system so that you build your one character and you can change jobs or classes and you never have to delete or recreate another character. What this game does is it kind of flips that on its head, where each character is locked in to a special set of abilities and they're all unique, and even the gender of the character has an effect on what kind of abilities they have. Like a certain gender might have a better fire type spell or something like that. But the game is the opposite of Final Fantasy XI Online in that it's kind of designed for you to complete the game with multiple characters, and it encourages exploration in that way. So it kind of encourages you to do a melee build, get a bunch of rare loot, give your money and loot to your next character that you're going to start off with, and try a force spellcasting build, and then do it again and try a ranger build, and then you're trying a human build, and now you're going to try a build with one of the android characters in the game that have the ability to use traps, and see how that twists your gameplay formula. So it's a very, I wouldn't say short, it's a huge grind to level 200, but the basic course through the game can be done in, I'd say, like a lower number of hours, and it's kind of designed for you to just do it over and over again in kind of like, again, it's kind of this like proto-roguelike DNA, right? Where you're doing it over and over again, but in a fashion that's kind of like an MMO. Really, it's just a very interesting formula. And a lot of people say, like, oh, it's just like, Diablo or something like that. But I do think I see a lot now that's kind of more in line with, roguelikes. And then, yes, there's the Diablo formula that's in there as well, which is something the developers talked about a lot when they're talking about, like, you know, one of their biggest inspirations for this game. I think I was reading interviews around the 20th anniversary, and they were saying like there was one point where they made everybody on the dev team like play Diablo for a certain period of time. So there's that. Altogether though, amazing graphics, amazing music, amazing gameplay, amazing community experience, amazing interactions with friends that you would make to this day on private servers. If you hop in, super friendly community, super positive community. People are gonna welcome you with open arms, and they're gonna take you out for a game, and they'll even hop on voice chat with you and kind of show you the ropes and take you through your first battle with the first boss, the dragon. It's just a really, really beautiful experience playing a game and having fun with other people. And I think in gaming, like, definitely a lot of fun single player solitary moments, but I think the best ones, you know, are ones that you play with a lot of other people. And I think that that's one of the threads through this top 10. So, oh my gosh, this video was so long because I talk too much. And yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If anybody stuck around to the end, like, definitely leave a comment in the comment section and be like, I stuck around to the end. And then also, I would love to know what your top 10 games are and why they're your top 10 games. I would be like really curious. And I don't like, try to pick stuff that's personal to you, not like the best stuff like, oh, it's Ocarina of Time and it's, you know, Grand Theft Auto and it's Halo 1 and it's like all these like classics, Mario 64. If those games are your favorite, that's totally cool. But I think for a lot of people, you're like, if you do soul searching, like I find a lot of people's favorite games are like a weird game. It might even be like a janky game. So I'm always interested to hear like, not like from the heart, what are your top 10 games? I'd love to hear in the comments. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.